The air was thick with the earthy scent of burning sage and fragrant flowers, a perfumed symphony wafting through the village square. At the heart of this ancient settlement, nestled at the edge of a dense, whispering forest, hundreds of villagers had gathered for their most sacred ceremony. Beneath the warm glow of a crimson sunset, they stood in reverent silence, their faces illuminated by flickering oil lamps placed strategically around a towering statue. The statue, carved from weathered stone, depicted a lion mid-roar, its paws poised as if in defense of something unseen. To the villagers, it was no mere effigy, it was the guardian of their history, their protector in times of turmoil, and the bearer of their prayers. Chants, rhythmic and melodic, began to rise as the village elder stepped forward. Clad in robes embroidered with golden thread, his voice trembled with age but carried the weight of generations. He raised his hands, palms open to the heavens, and began the invocation, calling upon the spirit of the guardian lion to bless the village with abundance and peace. Children sat cross-legged at the feet of their parents, wide-eyed and quiet, while the elderly clutched their prayer beads with trembling hands. The entire village moved as one, a living tapestry woven together by their shared belief. Then it happened. A guttural growl shattered the harmony, cutting through the chants like a blade through silk. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and heads whipped around toward the forest's edge. Emerging from the shadows was a lion, not the stone guardian that loomed silently above them, but a living, breathing embodiment of raw power and majesty. The beast's golden mane caught the last rays of sunlight, shimmering like a crown, and its amber eyes burned with an intensity that froze every soul in its gaze. The villagers were paralyzed, their prayers caught in their throats. Some clutched each other, their fear palpable, while others dropped to their knees, tears streaming down their faces as they whispered prayers. The lion moved with deliberate grace, each step echoing like a drumbeat against the cobbled square. It wasn't hunting, it wasn't fleeing, it was purposeful, as if it knew exactly where it was headed. The beast stopped in front of the statue, its gaze locked on the stone lion towering above. Then it roared. The sound wasn't just a roar, it was a symphony of power, grief, and something ineffable that resonated in their bones. The air seemed to vibrate with its fury, and the oil lamps flickered violently, as though the earth itself had been shaken awake. The villagers watched, wide-eyed and breathless, as the lion began to circle the statue, its tail swishing with a deliberate rhythm. What was it doing? Why was it here? A baby cried, breaking the trance, and the lion's ears twitched. For a brief moment it turned its head toward the sound, its gaze softening almost imperceptibly. Then, just as quickly, it resumed its vigil around the statue, its movements slow and deliberate, as if performing its own ritual. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Was it a sign? A warning? The elder, still standing at the forefront, gripped his staff tightly, his knuckles white. He murmured something inaudible, his eyes darting between the living lion and its stone counterpart. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness crept in, the lion let out another roar, this one softer, almost mournful. The villagers felt it in their chests, a vibration of emotion that spoke to something primal and ancient. A child whispered to her mother, "Is it angry at us?" The mother didn't answer, she didn't know. No one did. And yet, there were signs, subtle, almost imperceptible signs, that this was no ordinary lion. Its movements seemed deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though it was acting out a ritual long forgotten by human memory. The markings on its coat, faint but intricate, bore an uncanny resemblance to the patterns etched into the base of the stone statue. Was this lion tied to their guardian of old? Had the stories of their ancestors missed something crucial? The elder's voice cracked as he finally spoke. "It is here for a reason," he declared, his words trembling yet resolute. "The guardian has come. We must not fear it, we must understand it," but his words were met with silence. The villagers, torn between awe and terror, remained rooted in place, their eyes fixed on the lion as it sat on its haunches at the statue's base, staring into the eyes of its stone twin, as though in silent communion. The night deepened, the stars blinking into existence one by one, casting a faint silver glow over the village square. Still, the lion did not move. It remained there, a silent sentinel, as though waiting for something or someone. The villagers dispersed slowly, reluctantly, their minds buzzing with questions and theories. Only the elder stayed behind, his gaze unwavering as he knelt before the lion. "What do you seek?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The lion didn't answer, of course, but its eyes seemed to gleam with an intelligence that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't just an animal, it was something more, something ancient, something tied to the very soul of the village. And so, the stage was set. The villagers would spend the night wrestling with their fears and curiosities, and by morning, their lives would be forever changed. For the lion was not just a visitor, it was a message, a mystery, a call to rediscover the truths buried in their past, and whatever it sought, it would not leave until it was found. The hum of an engine broke the stillness of the forest, signaling the arrival of Dr. Thomas. The jeep rattled along the uneven dirt road, its tires crunching over stones and roots. Thomas, a wildlife biologist in his early 40s, sat stiffly behind the wheel, his eyes scanning the dense canopy above. Shadows of leaves danced across his face, but his expression remained stoic, his jaw set. The journey had been long, but for Thomas, it wasn't just the miles that weighed on him, it was the memories he carried. Thomas had spent his life among animals, studying their habits, their habitats, their mysteries. Yet, despite his extensive research and published works, it was his personal failures that haunted him most. He carried the weight of a decision made years ago, one that had cost him his younger brother's life. It wasn't an accident, not entirely. It was a misjudgment, a miscalculation during a research trip in the Amazon rainforest. A faulty rope, an overlooked detail, and the jungle's ruthlessness had taken his brother in an instant. Since then, every choice, every step was laden with overthinking and hesitation. Guilt had become his constant companion. His current mission, however, was meant to be a fresh start, or so his colleagues had insisted. A project funded by an international wildlife organization had sent him to this remote village to study the behavioral patterns of the region's apex predators. But to Thomas, it felt like an exile rather than an opportunity. He had lost his passion somewhere along the way, replacing it with the cold, methodical precision of someone trying to avoid another mistake. As Thomas's jeep rolled into the village, the scene before him was unlike anything he had encountered before. The village was a living relic, untouched by modernity, its houses built from wood and stone, their roofs thatched with palm leaves. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires and herbs. Children ran barefoot, their laughter mingling with the melodic hum of women grinding grains. In the center of it all stood the square he had read about, dominated by the statue of the lion. The village radiated an air of mysticism, its people deeply rooted in traditions passed down through generations. Life here revolved around ceremonies, symbols, and stories told by firelight. Yet there was a fragility to their existence, a reliance on their beliefs to sustain them through hardships. The forest that encircled them like a green fortress was both their lifeline and their greatest fear. It provided food and resources but also harbored dangers, both real and imagined. Thomas could sense it immediately. This was a place where the line between myth and reality blurred. As Thomas stepped out of his vehicle, the first person to greet him was Elder Malachi, the village's patriarch. His face was a map of wrinkles, each one etched with stories of battles fought and wisdom gained. Despite his age, his posture was regal, his voice steady. He welcomed Thomas with a firm handshake and a scrutinizing gaze, as though he could peer into the depths of his soul. Malachi was more than a leader, he was the keeper of the village's stories, the voice of its ancestors. His authority was unquestioned, but his heart was heavy with the burden of preserving the old ways in a world that was rapidly changing. Among the crowd gathered to see the newcomer was Amara, a young girl no older than 16, with wide, curious eyes and a spirit too big for the village's narrow paths. She stood slightly apart, clutching a basket of wildflowers, her gaze fixed on the foreigner with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. Amara was a dreamer, always asking questions that others dismissed. She longed for a life beyond the forest, one where she could chart her own course, but for now she was tethered to tradition, her dreams hidden beneath the guise of obedience. Thomas wasn't alone on this mission. Accompanying him was Martin, his research assistant, a man 10 years his junior with a sharp wit and an even sharper tongue. Martin was everything Thomas was not: optimistic, energetic, and unburdened by the ghosts of the past. He had joined the mission hoping to learn from the renowned Dr. Thomas, unaware of the emotional walls his mentor had built. Despite Thomas's cold demeanor, Martin's enthusiasm never waned, and he often served as a much-needed bridge between the reserved biologist and the people he was meant to work with. Thomas's initial encounter with the villagers was marked by mutual curiosity and caution. The villagers, wary of outsiders, watched him closely, their whispers barely audible over the crackling fires. Amara, emboldened by her curiosity, approached him with a hesitant smile and offered him a handful of wildflowers. For luck, she said simply, her voice carrying the lilt of the local dialect. Thomas accepted them with a nod, his lips twitching into a fleeting smile before disappearing into his usual stoicism. As the day progressed, Malachi guided Thomas and Martin through the village, narrating its history in a tone that was both proud and mournful. He spoke of the lion statue, its significance, and the strange occurrences that had unsettled the village in recent weeks. His words were heavy with implication, but Thomas, ever the scientist, sought logic in his tales. The forest loomed in the background, its towering trees casting long shadows over the village. Its presence was inescapable, a constant reminder of both life and danger. Thomas found himself drawn to it, not by curiosity but by a sense of inevitability. He knew his answers lay within its depths, though he wasn't sure if he was ready to confront them. As night fell, the village square transformed. Lanterns illuminated the lion statue, casting its shadow across the cobblestones. The villagers gathered again, their voices rising in chants that echoed through the forest. Thomas watched from the sidelines, his heart heavy with questions. What role did this lion, this forest, play in the villagers' lives? And why, despite his skepticism, did he feel an inexplicable pull toward the statue and its silent guardian? In that moment, Thomas realized this mission wasn't just about studying animals. It was about uncovering the layers of a story far older than he could have imagined, and perhaps, in doing so, uncovering something within himself. The lion returned the very next evening. Just as the villagers began their nightly rituals, its deep growl echoed through the forest, silencing the chants and halting the rhythm of the ceremony. Emerging from the trees with the same regal presence as before, it strode into the square, its golden eyes fixed on the stone statue. The villagers, now more fearful than awestruck, whispered amongst themselves. "It's a sign," one elder muttered, but of what a younger man replied, his tone laced with apprehension. The lion circled the statue again, its tail swishing with deliberate precision. It paused at the base of the statue, its nose brushing against the weathered stone. Then, as if consumed by some unseen force, it let out a roar that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath their feet. The villagers' reactions were varied. Some knelt in reverence, others backed away in fear, and a few began to argue. Was this a message from their guardian, or was the lion an omen of doom? For days, the lion's visits continued, each time more perplexing than the last. It showed no aggression, never threatening the villagers, but its presence was impossible to ignore. The patterns of its behavior were too deliberate, its actions too enigmatic. Some villagers interpreted the lion's behavior as a divine warning. "It's the guardian," an elderly woman insisted. "It's telling us to mend our ways." Others saw it as a bad omen, a harbinger of disaster. The community grew divided, with factions forming around these interpretations. The conflict spilled into daily life, disrupting the village's harmony. Farmers hesitated to enter the forest, afraid they might encounter the lion. Children were kept indoors, and the usual sense of community was replaced with unease. Elder Malachi, usually a calming presence, struggled to mediate the growing tensions. "We must not act out of fear," he urged, but his words fell on deaf ears. The village was on the brink of chaos, and the lion remained at the center of it all. Thomas observed these events with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. To him, the lion's behavior, while unusual, was not supernatural. "Animals don't act without reason," he muttered to Martin as they watched the lion's latest visit from a distance. "There's something driving this behavior, something we're missing." His scientific mind refused to entertain the villagers' interpretations, but he couldn't deny the mystery demanded attention. Thomas began his investigation the only way he knew how: systematically. He documented the lion's visits, noting the time of day, its actions, and any environmental factors that might offer clues. He examined the statue closely, running his fingers over its intricate carvings. To his surprise, he discovered markings near the base that didn't match the rest of the statue. These markings were faint but deliberate, etched with precision that suggested they were added long after the statue was first erected. "What do you think it means?" Martin asked, crouching beside him. "I don't know yet," Thomas admitted, but his curiosity was piqued. The markings, he suspected, were a clue, a piece of a much larger puzzle. Thomas's investigation led him to the village archives, a small, dusty room filled with scrolls, maps, and relics from the past. It was there that he found an old leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. The handwriting was uneven, the ink faded, but the words told a story that sent chills down his spine. The diary belonged to one of the village's first settlers, who had written extensively about a prophecy involving a guardian lion. According to the entries, the lion was not just a protector but a sentinel tied to the balance of nature and the village's survival. The prophecy spoke of a time when the guardian would return, bringing both a warning and an opportunity for redemption. "When the lion roars at the stone, the forest shall reveal its truth," one passage read. What truth? Thomas wondered. And why now? As Thomas shared his findings with Martin, The pieces of the puzzle began to align, though they were far from complete. The markings on the statue, the lion's behavior, and the villagers' stories all pointed to something ancient and significant, a connection between the lion and the village that had been forgotten over time. Meanwhile, the villagers' divisions grew more pronounced. Those who believed in the lion's divine purpose clashed with those who saw it as a threat. The younger generation, led by Amara, sought answers beyond tradition. Maybe it's not about the past, she argued during a heated discussion in the square. Maybe the lion is showing us something we need to learn for the future. Elder Malachi, torn between his role as a custodian of tradition and his desire to unify the village, turned to Thomas for guidance. "What do you think this lion wants?" he asked one evening as they stood beneath the shadow of the statue. "I think it wants us to look deeper," Thomas replied, his voice heavy with contemplation. "The answer isn't in what we see, it's in what we haven't discovered yet." Thomas's research intensified as he delved into the history of the forest, the village, and its relationship with wildlife. He noted patterns in the lion's visits, aligning them with lunar cycles and other natural phenomena. He discovered that the forest surrounding the village was home to ancient cave systems, some of which had yet to be explored. Guided by the diary's cryptic passages, Thomas and Martin ventured into the forest, tracing paths that seemed almost instinctual. They stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance concealed by thick vines and moss. Inside, they found carvings similar to those on the statue, along with depictions of lions intertwined with human figures. The images told a story of coexistence, a pact between the village and the guardian, but the carvings also hinted at something ominous: a disruption in the balance, a warning of consequences if the pact was broken. As Thomas stood in the dim light of the cave, a realization struck him: the lion's behavior wasn't random. It was calling their attention to something urgent, something they had overlooked for generations. Returning to the village, Thomas shared his discoveries with Malachi and Amara, hoping to bridge the divide between tradition and science. "This lion isn't just a symbol," he explained. "It's tied to your history, your survival, and it's trying to tell us something." His words planted seeds of doubt and curiosity among the villagers, but they also fueled the tension. Could they trust an outsider to interpret the lion's message? As the lion continued its visits, the mystery deepened, and Thomas found himself drawn further into a story that blurred the line between myth and reality. The central conflict had become clear: the village's future depended on unraveling the secrets of its past, and the lion held the key. But the question remained: could they decipher its message before it was too late? The forest had never felt so alive, yet so unnervingly silent. Each rustle of leaves, each distant call of a bird seemed to carry a message, a warning. As Thomas ventured deeper into the forest, accompanied by Martin and occasionally Amara, the weight of his discoveries pressed heavier on his shoulders. The caves and relics they uncovered weren't just archaeological finds, they were pieces of a living story, fragments of a connection between the village and the lion that seemed to defy explanation. The hidden caves became Thomas's obsession. By piecing together the carvings and symbols etched into the walls, he began to unravel the story of the lion's lineage. Each carving depicted a different era, showing lions standing beside humans, their postures protective yet collaborative. The final image in one cave sent shivers down his spine: a lion roaring at a human figure kneeling before a stone effigy, much like the statue in the village square. "What do you think it means?" Amara asked, her voice tinged with awe. Thomas hesitated, his flashlight beam lingering on the carving. "It's a warning," he said finally. "But it's also a plea. The lion isn't just protecting, it's demanding something." As they delved further into the caves, they uncovered relics that deepened the mystery. An ancient pendant, engraved with a lion's head, seemed to radiate warmth when held. Pieces of pottery bore inscriptions in a language neither Thomas nor Martin could recognize. Each artifact hinted at a time when the village and the forest were in perfect harmony, bound by a mutual understanding that had long been forgotten. Through these discoveries, the story of the lion's lineage began to unfold in Thomas's mind. He imagined the first settlers of the village encountering a pride of lions, their initial fear giving way to a wary respect. Over time, the lions became symbols of strength and guardianship, their presence woven into the fabric of the village's identity. But the balance was fragile. The carvings told of times when the harmony was disrupted, when greed, fear, or arrogance led the villagers to break their pact with the lions. Each time, disaster followed: floods, famine, disease. The guardian lion's role was not only to protect but also to remind the villagers of their place in the natural order. For Thomas, the lion's story became a mirror reflecting his own struggles. He began to see his guilt over his brother's death in a new light. Just as the villagers had once failed to honor their pact, Thomas had failed to protect his brother. The parallels were undeniable, and they gnawed at him, forcing him to confront emotions he had buried for years. Amara, ever curious and unafraid to challenge authority, became a surprising catalyst for Thomas's growth. "You keep looking for answers in the past," she said one evening as they studied a newly discovered artifact. "But maybe the lion's trying to tell us something about now, about what we're doing wrong." Her words struck a chord, sparking a realization that the mystery wasn't just about the lion or the village. It was about humanity's responsibility to the world around it. Through their conversations, Thomas began to soften, his rigid scientific approach giving way to a more empathetic perspective. He started to see the value in the villagers' beliefs, even if he didn't fully understand them. And in turn, Amara began to trust Thomas, seeing him not just as an outsider but as someone genuinely invested in the village's fate. As the days passed, the lion's behavior grew increasingly erratic. It no longer confined its visits to the square, appearing in unexpected places around the village. It prowled near the edges of the forest, roaring into the night, its cries echoing with a desperation that sent chills down the villagers' spines. Once again, the village was thrown into turmoil. The factions within the community deepened. Those who believed the lion was a savior pointed to its continued presence as proof of its divine purpose. Others, fearful and mistrustful, began to talk of driving the lion away or worse, killing it. Tensions ran high, and arguments erupted in the square, disrupting the fragile peace Elder Malachi had worked so hard to maintain. "What if it attacks one?" man shouted during a heated meeting. "It hasn't harmed anyone," a woman retorted. "It's here for a reason, we just don't understand it yet. And if we wait too long, it might be too late," another voice countered. Thomas found himself caught in the middle of these debates, struggling to mediate without betraying his own uncertainties. He was convinced the lion's actions were significant, but he lacked the answers the villagers so desperately needed. One night, the lion's roars were accompanied by an unsettling event. A violent storm swept through the village, uprooting trees and flooding the fields. Many saw it as an omen, further dividing the community. The villagers who had been skeptical of the lion now called for drastic action, while others insisted the storm was a test of their faith. Driven by a sense of urgency, Thomas redoubled his efforts. He spent hours poring over the diary and examining the relics, searching for connections he might have missed. The pendant they had found in the caves seemed to hold particular significance. When held near the markings on the statue, it seemed to align perfectly, almost as if it were a key. But to what? As Thomas worked tirelessly, his internal struggle came to a head. He couldn't shake the feeling that the lion's erratic behavior was linked to his own emotional turmoil. The parallels between the lion's journey and his guilt over his brother's death became impossible to ignore. Was the lion's message one of redemption not just for the village, but for himself? The growing unrest in the village reached a boiling point. One group, led by a fiery young man named Rohan, planned to drive the lion away, convinced it posed a threat. Another, led by Elder Malachi, argued for patience and understanding. Amara, caught in the middle, turned to Thomas for guidance. "You've seen the caves," she pleaded. "You know the lion isn't just an animal. What do we do?" Thomas hesitated, his confidence wavering. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I know we can't act out of fear. We have to trust that the answers are there, we just haven't found them." The lion, oblivious to the turmoil it had caused, continued its nightly visits, its roars echoing through the village like a call to action. But whether that call would lead to unity or destruction remained to be seen. The stakes had never been higher, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. The only certainty was that the lion's message could no longer be ignored. The night of the revelation began like any other, with the lion's familiar roar echoing through the village square. But this time, the sound carried a note of urgency, a raw and unrelenting call that pierced through the villagers' arguments and fears. As the community gathered once more, drawn by the undeniable pull of the lion's presence, Thomas found himself standing at the statue's base, staring into the beast's unyielding amber eyes. The final clue came almost by accident. While studying the markings on the statue, Thomas noticed that the pendant from the cave, when placed in a specific groove at the base of the statue, caused a faint tremor beneath his feet. With Amara and Martin at his side, he worked to uncover what lay beneath. Together they pried open a concealed hatch, revealing a hidden chamber below the statue. The chamber was small, but its contents were profound. At its center was a pedestal holding a weathered scroll, its edges brittle with age. Surrounding it were carvings that mirrored the ones in the caves, depicting the story of the guardian lion and the village's ancient pact with nature. The scroll, written in the same archaic script found on the pottery and relics, was translated with the help of the diary and Malachi's knowledge of the old tongue. The message was clear: the village's survival was tied to its harmony with the forest and its creatures. The guardian lion was a symbol of this balance, its presence both a blessing and a warning. The carvings revealed that the lion's visits were not random but purposeful, a call to restore the harmony that had been disrupted by neglect and greed. The villagers had once lived in symbiosis with the forest, but over time they had forgotten their role as stewards, and the guardian had returned to remind them. As Thomas read the scroll aloud to the gathered villagers, the weight of its message settled over them like a shroud. The lion's actions were not those of a predator, but of a protector, a sentinel, ensuring that the pact was honored. The revelation struck a chord with everyone present, bridging the gap between the elders' traditions and the younger generation's skepticism. Amara, emboldened by the truth, stepped forward. "Do you see now?" she implored, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "The lion isn't our enemy, it's our guide. It's showing us what we've forgotten, what we need to remember to survive." Her words resonated deeply, cutting through the fear and mistrust that had divided the community. She spoke of the importance of respecting the forest, of finding a balance between progress and preservation. Her courage inspired others, and slowly, the villagers began to see the lion not as a threat, but as a symbol of their shared history and future. For Thomas, the moment was deeply personal. He realized that his journey had mirrored the lion's in many ways. Just as the lion sought to restore balance, Thomas had been searching for redemption, for a way to reconcile his past mistakes with his present. Standing before the villagers, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. "This lion," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "isn't just a guardian for you, it's a guardian for all of us. It's a reminder that we're part of something bigger, that our choices have consequences. We need to protect it, not just because of tradition, but because it's the right thing to do." The villagers watched in silence as Thomas approached the lion, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt before it, not out of fear but out of respect. The lion, as if understanding the significance of the moment, lowered its head and let out a low, rumbling purr. It was a gesture of acceptance, of trust. The lion's behavior changed after that night. It no longer roared or prowled with the same urgency. Instead, it stayed near the statue, a calm and watchful presence. The villagers, inspired by the revelation and Amara's impassioned plea, began to make changes. They repaired the damage they had caused to the forest, planting trees and adopting practices that honored their ancient pact. The divisions within the community healed as they worked together toward a common goal. For Thomas, the experience was transformative. He no longer saw himself as an outsider but as a part of the story, a piece of the balance the lion sought to restore. In protecting the lion and honoring the pact, he found a measure of peace he hadn't thought possible. The guilt that had haunted him for years began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. Amara's role in the village also changed. She became a bridge between the old ways and the new, helping the elders preserve their traditions while guiding the younger generation toward a more sustainable future. Her bravery and insight earned her the respect of everyone, and she became a symbol of hope and resilience. The lion's presence gradually became a source of comfort rather than fear. It remained in the forest, a living reminder of the lessons the village had learned. And though its roars were no longer heard as frequently, they echoed in the villagers' hearts, a constant reminder of their responsibility to the land and each other. For Thomas, the mission had become much more than a scientific study. It was a journey of self-discovery, of finding redemption not just through understanding the lion's purpose, but through embracing his own. And as he prepared to leave the village, he knew that the lessons he had learned here would stay with him forever, just as the lion's roar would remain a part of the village's story. The emotional climax ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, profound transformation, one that united the village, restored balance, and healed wounds, both seen and unseen. The first light of dawn broke over the village, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and fresh. The lion sat silently beneath the statue, its majestic form glowing in the soft sunlight. Its eyes, once filled with urgency, now held a calmness that mirrored the villagers' newfound peace. The mystery of its presence had been unraveled, and the village, once divided, now stood united. With the lion's role as guardian fully understood, the villagers embraced their responsibility to honor the pact it represented. They worked tirelessly to restore the forest's health, replanting trees, cleaning streams, and limiting their use of the land's resources. The elders revived ancient rituals, not out of blind adherence to tradition, but as a way to reconnect with the values they had nearly lost. The lion, having fulfilled its mission, began to spend more time in the forest, its visits to the village less frequent but no less meaningful. When it did appear, it was greeted with reverence and gratitude rather than fear. It was no longer just a symbol of their history but a living embodiment of balance and harmony. For Thomas, the resolution brought a profound sense of closure. The burden of his guilt had been lifted, replaced by a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of life. Standing by the statue one last time before his departure, he placed a hand on the stone lion and whispered a quiet thanks, not just to the guardian but to the village and its people for teaching him to confront his past and embrace the present. Amara, the young girl who had dared to question and challenge, emerged as a leader in her own right. Her blend of respect for tradition and vision for the future became a guiding light for the village. She organized initiatives to educate the younger generation about sustainable living, ensuring the lessons learned from the lion's visit would not be forgotten. Her courage and insight inspired others, earning her a place in the village's decision-making council. Though still young, she carried the wisdom of someone far beyond her years, embodying the balance between modernity and the traditions that had shaped the village for centuries. Her story became a testament to the power of resilience and hope, a living reminder that even the smallest voices can ignite the greatest changes. The village's journey from division to unity echoed universal themes of resilience and hope. The lion's presence had forced them to confront their fears, their past mistakes, and their responsibility to the natural world. By embracing these challenges with courage and faith, they found a way forward not by erasing their history, but by learning from it. Thomas's journey mirrored this transformation. Once burdened by guilt and self-doubt, he left the village with a renewed sense of purpose. The lion's unwavering loyalty to its role as guardian had inspired him to find his own way of contributing to the world. No longer running from his past, he resolved to use his knowledge and experiences to advocate for conservation and harmony, wherever his path took him next. The story concluded not with an ending, but with a beginning, a renewed commitment to the values of balance, courage, and hope. The village, the lion, and Thomas had all transformed, bound together by a shared journey that would echo for years to come. Every story has a guardian, a force that protects, inspires, and reminds us of what truly matters. For this village, it was a lion, a majestic creature whose roars echoed the call to reconnect with their roots, their home, and each other. But at its heart, this story isn't just about a lion. It's about love, the love the villagers had for their home and the love they rediscovered for the world that sustained them. It's about loyalty not only to tradition but also to the future they chose to build together. It's about resilience, the courage to face fears, mend broken bonds, and restore harmony where it had been lost. And most of all, it's about hope, the unshakable belief that even in the face of division and despair, we have the power to come together, to heal, and to thrive. Stories like this remind us of our shared humanity, the challenges we face, the lessons we learn, and the bonds we forge along the way. Have you ever experienced a moment that made you reflect on the importance of balance, resilience, or connection? Maybe you've witnessed an act of loyalty or felt inspired by the natural world around you. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories. Share them in the comments below, and let's create a space where hope and inspiration can thrive. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By joining us, you'll never miss another tale of courage, love, and hope. Every story we share is a reminder that the world is full of mysteries to uncover, lessons to learn, and connections to cherish. So hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Thank you for watching. Stay courageous, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.